The year is 2014, or as indie game historians will come to know it, 1 year before Sans. Yacht Club Games, a new game studio founded by former Way Forward director Jean Velasco, are busy cooking in their lab. The mad lad had an idea. What if he combined Retro's 80s platformers with a shovel? What if he took the best parts of Mega Man, DuckTales, and the Garden Centre? The result was a little-known indie game called Shovel Knight. To date, Shovel Knight has sold in the realm of 3 million copies, and is considered one of the most high-profile indie game releases of the last decade. In 2014, it won the award for the best indie game, and everyone who so much as brushed past it thought highly of it. So when I got my grubby little mitts on it shortly after release, I was expecting the indie game experience of my life. I was wrong. Now, I didn't think the game was bad. Far from it. The game oozed more joy and personality than a puppy at an all-you-can-eat buffet. But there was something about the way Shovel Knight controlled that didn't gel with me. And as such, I put the game down after beating Plague Knight, and I didn't come back to it. But I've always wondered what I was missing, and a mere 9 years later I've decided to find out. So in this video I'll be playing through the entirety of Shovel Knight campaign, giving my thoughts as we go. This video isn't meant as a comprehensive analysis of the entire game. I mean, who do you think I am? Somebody intelligent? Rather, this video will detail my personal experience playing the game. Think of it as 1 part review, 1 part playthrough, and 1 part shitpost. Along the way, I'll be giving my completely objective opinions that you're guaranteed to agree with me on. My name's Lord Spade, though most people call me a and I have never, ever beat Shovel Knight. Let's change that. The game begins with a few screens explaining the plot of the game. In time long past, Shovel Knight and Shield Knight travelled together, helping out the people of the land. Until one day, they went to the Tower of Fate, and a magic MacGuffin sealed Shield Knight away, seemingly forever. Shovel Knight was so depressed that he did the unthinkable. He opened a farm. He also never took off his armour and probably smells like a constipated badger. Eventually, the Enchantress appears with her order of no quarter to commit vague and general acts of evil. This draws Shovel Knight out of retirement, and we're launched straight into the game's first level. The first level does an excellent job of teaching you the game's mechanics without giving you a single tutorial prompt. This room teaches you that you can use your shovel to strike downwards. This room teaches you that dragons are weak to blunt force trauma. This room teaches you that you can bounce on enemies to get extra height to reach floating collectibles. But the most important lesson this level teaches you is that slimes and skeletons aren't the most dangerous enemy you'll face. No, that would be gravity. Isaac Newton has it out for you in this game, and gravity acts a lot like Dettel in that it will kill 99.9% of Shovel Knights. Luckily, this skeleton gets a taste of his own medicine, as he will just walk straight into this pit if you let him. That's another valuable lesson. What goes around comes around. Don't mess with karma. Dying in Shovel Knight is a lot like dying in real life, because you'll lose all of your money when it happens. Get back to it without dying and you can reclaim it, but die once more and it'll be gone forever. If that sounds familiar, then that's because it's similar to a mechanic found in a little known game called Terraria. After fighting through the level, you will encounter the Black Knight. Upon encountering him, he calls you blue, and for this grave insult, he must die. The Black Knight is like the Shovel Knight ran through an early 2000s emo filter. He has the same moves as you, the same weapon as you, he even has the same text font as you. Well, everyone has the same text font as you, but I needed a rule of 3. Luckily, the Black Knight wasn't born a bottomless pit, so we were able to take him out pretty easily. After the level is over, we find out whether the Shovel Knight sleeps in his armour, and it turns out he does! Someone hand this guy a bottle of deodorant. Stinky Knight has a mysterious dream, wherein Shield Knight falls from the heavens and you have to catch her before she hits the floor like Flow Rider. Clearly this dream is significant to the plot, but it's unclear as to why yet. I tried to reach out to MatPat to see if he had any ideas, but he won't return my calls and now I have a restraining order. We wake up and head straight to town. Once there, we're immediately greeted by a soldier who calls our shovel harmless. Yeah, well, tell that to Isaac Newton when I get my hands on him. Dude has a lot to answer for. In the town, we meet a lot of kooky personalities. We can upgrade our maximum health and magic, meet a Mormon dressed up as an apple, and return lost pieces of music to the bard. How the fuck did you lose this here? My favourite NPC is probably this hedgehog fellow. Don't ask me why, but his happy little face fills me with so much joy. And that's what this place is. Joyous. A happy little hovel in a land of 16-bit horrors. Not that I needed the rest because, you know, I got here quite easily and didn't die once. This footage is from my sister's game file. Yep, definitely hers and not mine. Nevertheless, we can't tarry. On the advice of the evangelical tree fruit, we take a short detour from saving the land to go to church. There we have a brief encounter with God, who does a funny TikTok dance before spitting in our cup. Drinking his saliva gives us the ability to instantly refill our HP and mana, which is quite useful. You can also choose to have 10 seconds of invincibility, or become a magnet for gold, but I basically never did this. In town, we find out that Pridemoor Keep has been taken over by King Knight, who I like to think took the throne just to give himself a knighthood. Tougher enemies get introduced in Pridemoor Keep, such as these mini-knights that will block your attack, so you have to jump around them and strike an opening. The Rodent Air Force, or RAF for short, also makes their first appearance with these whirly-bird rats. And how can I forget the casual pots of lava that pour from the ceiling throughout the entire level? I mean, who does King Knight think he is? Bowser? Pridemoor Keep marks my first in-level encounter with Chester, who was trapped in this chest with no method of escape. He's so grateful for us freeing him that he agrees to sell us a magic wand at full price. Oh, he's doing Big Daddy Bezos proud. Shovel Knight is full of optional items, some of which are used for combat, some for platforming, and some for both. They mix up the gameplay in interesting ways, but it's worth noting that they are optional and they do cost money to acquire, which is a point that we will be circling around to later. Upon fighting through rats and capitalism, we reach King Knight, who Shovel Knight proclaims is naught but a decadent dandy. After that burn, violence was inevitable. King Knight primarily attacks like he's trying to be Super Mario, stomping on my head like I'm some kind of shiny blue Goomba. Unfortunately for him, we're the ones who have the Fire Flower, and with a few well-placed shots, King Knight is usurped. The next level takes us deep into ghouls and goblins territory, with skeletons and ghosts being the primary enemy type, alongside frogs cosplaying as Blanca from Street Fighter. The main gimmick to see here is not being able to see. Every so often the level is plunged into darkness, and the YouTube viewing experience takes a nosedive. There's also these bridges that only move up and down when these skeleton heads are present on them. Don't hang around on them too long though, or you will get boned. At the end lies Spectre Knight, who immediately claims that Shield Knight is long dead, which basically confirms that she's still alive somewhere. Shovel Knight, unaware of narrative tropes, goes into gamer rage and proceeds to exercise the Spectre Knight. The Spectre Knight will teleport around the arena and you'll have to dodge his scythe attacks. Do that enough though and you'll strike the final blow, stripping Spectre Knight of his clothes like he's a bad guy from Kill la Kill.
Don't lose your way, your mind.
The next level is invitingly named the Explodatorium, or as I like to call it, a difficulty spike. The gimmick of this level is in the name. Plague Knight has spent millions of US dollars on Coca-Cola and Mentos, and now things are exploding everywhere and leaving a terrible mess. The result is that you will die. A lot. And not just from explosions. Gravity is an ever-present threat, and when I said the level was a difficulty spike, I was being quite literal. Partway through you will encounter a mini-boss, who is furiously scrounging through his collection of Molotov cocktails in order to find his hair growth lotion, at which point he will do an impression of a Wolverine in heat and fuck you up with his claws. It's a fun boss, if not a bit long, but it's nothing compared to the end of level encounter. I think Plague Knight is perhaps my favourite member of the Order of No Quarter. He has a cocky attitude, I'm a sucker for the Plague Doctor aesthetic, and his boss fight is arguably the best in the game. I think the reason why I like it so much is because his attacks interact with the environment, destroying blocks and altering the terrain. This forces you to be constantly adapting to the fight on the fly, and every rematch will play out a little bit differently. It's a seemingly small thing, but goes a long way to making him memorable. And my shovel goes an even longer way to making him unconscious. On the world map, you will occasionally see characters wandering around. Encountering these characters will either drop you into a mini-level, or, on occasion, a unique boss fight. Reize is one of those bosses, attacking us because they see us wielding a shovel and presumes we're the Black Knight. Insert a contemporary reference to Sonic Adventure 2 here. Reize fights with two sharp boomerangs, which in practice means they spend most of the fight literally chucking their weapons away. This makes the fight pretty easy, but after the Explodatorium, that was a welcome change of pace. It's time for everyone's favourite type of level. The underwater level! Though, to give credit to the game, the underwater movement doesn't feel particularly sluggish in Shovel Knight. Horizontal movement remains pretty much the same. The only difference is that the vertical movement is more floaty. It's a change of pace, rather than an absolute pace killer. Speaking of killer, during this level we encounter a suspiciously lone chest in a big empty room. And if video games have taught me anything, you should always roll straight up and oh my lord. I'm pretty sure this is the goldfish your parents flushed down the toilet. The trauma from that experience has given your pet goldfish the ability to shoot ballistic missiles, and Shovel Knight can do very little but run away. Eventually, Shovel Knight will find a place where he can turn and fight, and with enough well-timed hits he will finish the job your parents started. Afterwards the chest falls to our feet, and upon rummaging through it we find Chester again, who is so incredibly happy to be rescued. In fact, his wealth of gratitude is so large, we literally can't afford it. Great. At the end of the level, we fight Treasure Knight, who is not that difficult to fight, but is very cool design-wise. Not just his visual design, but the way he moves in bursts really sells the fact that this fight is taking place underwater. Wait, how is Shovel Knight breathing? He also has some pretty cool attacks with his anchor hook, which he uses not just for movement but also for attempted murder.
Get over here!
Emphasis on attempted, because we strike him down and sink his battleship without much hassle. After Treasure Night, another mini-boss pops up on the world map, Baz. Baz is annoyed because he's not been let into the Order of No Quarter, because they were only accepting 8 applicants to fit with the Mega Man boss template. Fighting Baz is a lot like fighting Indiana Jones, in that Baz can swing from a whip. But unlike Harrison Ford, he electrifies his body to shock his opponents. At least, I presume Harrison Ford can't do that. To be fair, I've never met Harrison Ford, so more research is required to find out for sure. Upon beating Baz, Shovel Knight tells him that if he can accept defeat with dignity, he will always be a knight at heart. To which Baz has a massive tantrum. So before we go, we teach Baz an important lesson in how to act like a dignified knight.
Nice on!
After this important lesson, Shovel Knight ventures into Armor Outpost. Here you can buy armor that gives you various superpowers and upgrade your shovel to be more convenient, such as giving it the ability to dig up an entire mound of dirt in one swing. It basically becomes a JCB. Here we will encounter the mysterious Mr. Hat, another bonus boss fight. Mr. Hat has an insatiable need to take Shovel Knight's helmet. Shovel Knight explains that he's not going to remove the helmet, probably because it's superglued to his head. Mr. Hat does offer to remove the helmet at the low cost of your life. However, we can't quite afford that and have to politely turn him down. We venture into the Lost City in order to end the Mole Night. The Lost City looks like an average creation on city skylines, in that it's fallen to complete disrepair and is somehow covered in lava. Most of my deaths in this level came at the hands of said lava, doing a Terminator impression every time I fell into it. During this level we pick up the Knuckle Dusters, which allows us to plough through dirt horizontally, even if there's nothing below our feet. This is super cool to pull off and really changes how you interact with the platforming of the level, is what I would like to say, but because the Knuckle Duster is optional and costs money to purchase, money the player may not have at this point in the game, the Lost City, and in fact the entire game, bar one side level, cannot design platforming challenges around these platforming items. The Knuckle Duster is super cool, but is held back by how the game handles magic items, and as such, I basically never use them. The Mole Knight boss fight is also a bit of a disappointment. His design is cool, but there's a few too many opportunities to pogo on his head. It seems like the devs knew this, because there are moments where he will set himself on fire and become impervious to the pogoing. But it's not quite enough to stop you, and as such he's arguably the easiest boss of the game. Certainly the easiest Knight of No Quarter. After Mole Knight, we get our first encounter with the Enchantress. She appears before the Black Knight, an imposing figure whose character design is completely different to the type of designs we've seen thus far, lending her an uneasy air. Either that, or it's because her colour scheme matches that of the Explodatorium. Either's just as likely, really. In the ensuing conversation, it seems Black Knight cares a lot about the Enchantress's safety, even though he seems reluctant to actually join her Order of No Quarter. I wonder if there's anything plot significant about that. Nah, probably not. The rematch against Black Knight is pretty cool. It was here that I found out that Black Knight will reflect projectiles back at you if you fire them at him, meaning you can't just sit back and mindlessly spam fireballs like you've just picked up Street Fighter for the first time.
Hadouken!
He's faster and stronger too, but keep your cool while you menacingly walk towards him and you'll strike him down with no quarter. Afterwards, I took a trip to the Hall of Champions, where I paid the bad guy from Kung Fu Panda 2 5,000 quid to enter. Inside are the faces and initials of everyone who paid $200 or more to back the game on Kickstarter, along with a full alphabet translation from English to the game's written language. There's just one catch. The whole place is haunted. Luckily, I watched a lot of Scooby-Doo as a child, and I know a thing or two about how to deal with ghosts. After splitting up with myself to look for clues, I find these shiny blue balls. Upon smacking these balls, they ejected a light that could smite the ghosts into the afterlife. Several swinging balls and a boss fight later, and the hall is safe to wander around again. Overall, the Hall of Champions is a neat in-universe way to pay homage to the Kickstarter backers. Although when you stop and think about it, those ghosts probably belong to the Kickstarter backers, and we just murdered a lot of them. Oh well. We're the hero of the game, and thus can't be held accountable for our actions. Let's carry on. The next level takes us into the Clockwork Tower, an area where everything moves like it's the castle of Cagliostro. The platforms move, the hazards move, sometimes the platforms become the hazards and continue moving. At one point the camera starts moving, and if you fall behind, Shovel Knight straight up dies. Presumably because he's a vain bastard who can't bear for the attention to be on someone else for a second. Because of all the moving parts, there's plenty of chances for Isaac Newton to kill you with gravity, and it was probably one of the levels I struggled with the most. Still, I made it through and made it to Tinker Knight. Despite being part of the order that is rampaging through the country, Shovel Knight refers to Tinker Knight as friend, though I think friend is used in a context akin to how a drunk man would call you mate before decking you to the floor with a right hook. Speaking of which, that's precisely what we do to Tinker Knight. In fact, we deck the Tinker Knight so hard that he ends up crashing through the floor. However, Tinker Knight isn't out for the count, channeling the power of God and anime to summon a giant mech. This fight is essentially a platforming challenge. Jump on the attacks he sends out to climb up to Tinker Knight and send him crashing down with a headshot straight to his, head. Once outside, we're immediately assailed by the Phantom Striker, the last of the wandering mini-bosses. The Phantom Striker talks a big game, but is really just some guy who brought a sword to a shovel fight. He goes down really easily too, as he isn't very manoeuvrable and is thus vulnerable to your attacks. I believe it was Sun Tzu who once said, "Great things can be achieved with a shovel to the head." He literally said that. He didn't often speak English, but on this one occasion, he made an exception. We've had the underwater level, and now it's time for the ice level! And a bit like with the underwater level, the stranded ship avoids the more obnoxious elements that ice levels can bring. There are plenty of sections which take place on non-icy surfaces, and you'll spend more time hopping between ladders than you will slipping on the ice. For whatever reason, none of my deaths were the results of slippery ice, but instead always seemed to happen before a checkpoint. Immediately before a checkpoint. The puzzle platforming section where you have to smack the Bifrost spewing statue around was a fun way to mix up the platforming of the level. I should know. I had to do it 5 times. But you know, I've not been dying that much. I mean, who's keeping count? Oh, piss off, Grandma! I haven't mentioned it yet, but each level does a great job of delivering unique platforming set pieces. even if almost all of them relate to the shovel and comparatively few of them make use of your items. This will become very clear in the final level of the game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, we meet the Polar Knight, who has an even bigger shovel than we do. The dialogue here indicates a history between these two knights, but any past respect isn't going to stop them kicking the crap out of each other. Polar Knight fights by shoveling up snowballs and flinging them at you, which begs the question, what happens when Polar Knight is stuck in a desert? The answer to which is, it's a video game, shut up. Polar Knight's attacks will dig up the snow and reveal dangerous spikes that Shovelly Boy will have to adapt and move around. Theoretically, this creates the same kind of adaptivity that I praised the Plague Knight fight for, but because the spikes instantly kill you, it feels more obnoxious than interesting. Plus, you can deliberately get hit by Polar Knight and use the invincibility frames to stand on the spikes and whack him, which became my tactic of choice. Overall, not one of my favourite bosses. The Flying Machine level asks, what do you get when you take the platform out of platformer? The answer, of course, is which is short for, I entered the boss with less money than I entered the level with. And it all comes down to the final platforming challenge with the wind. But before then, the level has various other platforming challenges to smack your shovel into. You'll be bouncing off cannonballs, be lifted into the air by giant fans, and get blown away by these little guys from the RAF.
I have to go now.
Difficult, sure, but not impossible. And we're getting closer to the end game here, so difficulty is expected. But the final platforming challenge where the wind blows you over bottomless pits takes the cake, and all of my hard-earned gold with it. I don't want to call it bad, but I did not enjoy my time with this section of the level. I imagine on repeat playthroughs it's easier, once you've clicked to how exactly the physics of the wind affects Shovel Knight's movement, but for whatever reason it did not click with me on my first attempt. Or my 20th attempt. There were so many deaths here that the funeral planners had to start working overtime. Eventually though, we break through to the boss of the level, Propeller Knight. Propeller Knight fights with a sword like the Phantom Striker, and when the fight starts you could be fooled into thinking you're beaten the same way, by pogoing endlessly on his head. However, after enough bonking, Propeller Knight will summon an entire second airship to rain cannon fire down on his position. These cannonballs prevent you from doing the infinite pogo strategy because you've got to be more aware of your positioning, but it's nothing a few anchors to the face can't fix. Hit him enough times and he'll go down like all the others. With the Knights of No Quarter successfully quartered, it's time to begin the final act of the game. It's time to face Shovel Knight's destiny at the Tower of Fate. The Tower of Fate is made up of 2 levels before the final boss fight. These levels take the standout platforming gimmicks from each of the game's levels and gives them a final, tougher section. So once again, you'll be navigating a silhouetted landscape, platforming on the Bifrost Bridge, and having a rematch with the skeleton who killed you in level 1. I've learned nothing. The culmination of all these platforming challenges in one place really gives the Tower of Fate the climatic feeling it deserves. A nice touch is that these enemies that are unique to the Tower of Fate were actually seen all the way back in the game's opening cutscene. It makes us feel like we've come to the place where it all began. And now, it's time to end it. At the end of the first tower level, we have our final battle against the Black Knight, who gets his power enhanced by the Enchantress. This gives him the power to fly around and summon meteors, and can I say that the presentation of this fight is spectacular. The way the screen flashes when Black Knight summons the meteors, the excellent music, the entrance to the tower's interior looming in the background, excellent stuff. After throwing a few anchors at the Black Knight's coccyx, we have one last chat with him. "Surely you see who I'm trying to save," he splutters. "I do. Do you know a way to bring her back?" The Black Knight says they've only tried words, but that the Enchantress's magic is too strong for him to try anything else. He lets us pass, and we make our way over to see her. But not before doing some more platforming and running into some old friends. The Order of No Quarter is busy having their last supper before we stride in like a one-man Roman army to crucify the lot of them. Enter this game's version of the boss rush, which is actually not that difficult because I can only presume Chef Knight is cooking off screen and throws in a full heal after every fight. It is nevertheless a cool set piece, and what's even cooler is that the order you fight the knights in is random every time. After you've dealt with them, you see the knights all hanging on for dear life in the order you defeated them in. You can either leave them to their fate or save them. Save them, and you'll get a chance to talk to the knights, and each knight reacts differently to your presence. Propeller Knight is in awe of you, saying that if all of your adventures are this fun, then perhaps you should tag along. On the flip side, Treasure Knight just says that you're doomed. Fighting words from a guy who was just inches away from Davy Jones's locker. This little interaction really adds to the character of each knight and fleshes out the world of Shovel Knight. Each of these knights has interacted with the Shovel Knight in the past, and whilst we never see those events directly, the game does a good job of delivering on the idea that you all have a shared history. But that's all in the past. Now it's time for the final encounter. But not before we spend 10 minutes grinding the bottle-breaking minigame to buy all the suits of armour. The fate of the land can wait. I just got a new high score of 239. Nice. Everything has been building up to this moment. We've struggled through hardship and against the force of gravity itself to get here. But now it's time for the final boss fight against the big bad themselves. Of course, I'm talking about blocks. Well, that was Shovel Knight, everybody. Turns out his one big weakness was a brick to the face. Who knew? Please like and subscribe. Okay, but for reals. We jump past the spooky blocks and make our way to the Enchantress. Upon encountering her, Shovel Knight reveals that he knows that the Enchantress is the possessed form of Shield Knight. And as we all know, the best way to exorcise a demon is to whack the host with a shovel.
The power of Christ compels you!
Thus, the final boss begins. And as this is Shovel Knight, we should know that the true threat is not the Enchantress, but rather the bottomless pit she creates. Oh, Isaac Newton always knows how to bring the mood down. The Enchantress is by far the hardest boss of the game, which is fitting because she's the last one, though some of that difficulty feels artificial. She spends a significant amount of time out of reach below the battle arena, where, to my knowledge, the only thing that can hit her is a lucky anchor throw. So you spend a lot of time just kinda waiting. And if you fall into the pit she creates, which is her primary method of first-degree murder, it's an instant kill and you're back to the beginning. It may be the most difficult fight in the game, but it's far from my favourite. Still, the narrative thread keeps it from being boring. Eventually you'll hit the Enchantress enough that you'll free the Shield Knight. And she proceeds to fall to the earth. Throughout the game, you've been having these dreams, nightmares, or perhaps visions of this moment, of Shield Knight falling from the sky, and you having to catch her. And catch her you did, every single time. Now is the payoff for those dream sequences. As Shield Knight falls to earth, you leap up to catch her. And this time she doesn't disappear in a flash. This time, you save her. The two share some words, but can't chat for long. The power that possessed Shield Knight is still at large, and it is coming for them. They have to destroy the true evil behind this entire game. They have to destroy Isaac Newton! Okay, that's not what happened, but let's face it, after all the bottomless pits you've fallen into, it would have been just as narratively satisfying if it was. No, instead you team up with Shield Knight to defeat the true form of the Enchantress once and for all. Shield Knight will jump into the air, and you have to pogo off of her to give the Enchantress her comeuppance in the shape of a shovel. Upon dealing the final blow, the day is saved until wait, no it isn't! Shovel Knight is knocked unconscious by a magical blast. Shield Knight shields herself, but the Enchantress's magic is too strong. Will it overcome her? Again? The Black Knight then appears. Presumably he was off having a cigarette somewhere and is now popping in to check what all the commotion is about. Shield Knight tells him to take Shovel Knight and run. He reluctantly agrees. As the screen fades to black, you see the Enchantress dissipating before the screen fades out. So maybe Shield Knight is fine? Maybe? It's left ambiguous, as the next shot we see is the Tower of Fate crumbling as the townspeople cheer. Yeah, you celebrate now, but wait until you find out that was a protected building. Oh, the National Trust aren't going to be happy about this one. After a small compilation of the game's bosses getting into wacky post-game hijinks, we see the Black Knight carrying Shovel Knight away to a conveniently lit fire. The Black Knight leaves Shovel Knight there before bidding farewell. And then the credits roll. What an ending. The story of Shovel Knight is simple, but I think in part that's why it works so well. The characters don't get a lot of screen time, but simple touches like varying the level of animosity between them and the Shovel Knight really makes them stand out. It could be argued that Shovel Knight drops 90% of its story beats in the 11th hour, and that's because it does, but because the story is so simple, it's less noticeable, and containing most of the story to that final section in the Tower of Fate makes the tower all the more memorable. Overall, really enjoyed the story. But what about the game as a whole? Did I like the game? I think it's fairer to say that I appreciated the game. There were aspects that I loved. The characters, the music, the aesthetic, they were all amazing. But I never did fully click with the way Shovel Knight moves. I hadn't mastered the game's movement even by the time I had fully ascended the Tower of Fate, which held me back from fully enjoying the game in 2014, and the same is true today. Note that I'm not saying that Shovel Knight controls badly, just that the game feel didn't click with me as an individual. And that's fine. The controls clearly clicked with a heck of a lot of people, and that's more important at the end of the day. If this is your favourite game, I can definitely see why. It just wasn't mine. But nevertheless, I came away feeling like I had played a significant part of gaming's recent history, and I think that's special in and of itself. And I only died 125 times. Basically didn't die at all. I'm immortal, me. A god amongst gamers. I mean, one death is a tragedy, but 125 Hello again. This is a post-video ramble. If you watched all the way to the end, then thank you. I've never really done something like this before, so genuinely I really appreciate it. Also, this video turned out to be a lot longer than I thought I would make it. I feel like that's the sort of stereotypical thing for a video of this type, but hey-oh, it's true. I didn't really know what I wanted this video to be. I've been plagued a bit by indecision. Did I want it to be like an analysis? Did I want it to be like a review? Or like a gameplay summary with some humour haphazardly thrown in for good measure? Like, I don't know. So tell me, like, genuinely, like, what did you think worked? Put that in the comments, like, what you think worked, what you think didn't, because I'd really like to know. I also appreciate that you're probably saying skill issue after my sum up of the game at the end, and yeah, that is true. Like I say, I don't dislike Shovel Knight. I think Shovel Knight is objectively a really good game. I loved some bits of it, but not all of it clicked with me. And that's why I wanted to make this video, basically, for the funsies. I'm thinking if this does well, I might do another video, sort of, maybe one based on A Hat in Time, or Hollow Knight, or maybe Sekiro. Sort of 3 games bouncing around my head. So maybe comment below which of those you'd like to see, and I'll do those next maybe. I'd also really appreciate it if you clicked like and subscribe, and maybe told some friends about this video if you would like to. There's obviously no pressure, but it would be genuinely, it would mean the world to me. So if you can, do so. If not, no worries, okay? Alright, I'll see you peeps around, okay? Bye-bye! Which is short for, I entered the boss with less money than I entered the level with.
Hold it! Objection!